Chapter 2 After the Festival, 1984. 1. The reason Audrey was wearing the hat his sobbing boyfriend would later tell the police was because he had worn it at the Pitch Till You Win stall on the Bassey Park Fairgrounds. Just 6 days before his death, he was proud of it. He was wearing it because he loved this shitty little town. The boyfriend, Don Haggerty, screamed at the cops. Now, there's no need for that sort of language, Officer Harold Gardner told Haggerty. Harold Gardner was one of Dave Gardner's 4 sons. On the day his father had discovered the lifeless, one-armed body of George Denbrough, Harold Gardner had been 5 on this day. Almost 27 years later, he was 32 in Bolden. Harold Gardner recognized the reality of Don Haggerty's grief and pain, and at the same time found it impossible to take this seriously. This man, if you want to call him a man, was wearing lipstick and sainted pants so tight you can almost read the winklers in his cock. Grief or no grief, pain or no pain, he was, after all, just a queer, like his friend, the late Audrey Mellon. Let's go through it again, Harold's partner, Jeffrey Reeves, said. The two of you came out of the Falcon and turned toward the canal. Then what? How many times do I have to tell you, idiots? Haggerty was still screaming. They killed him. They pushed him over to the side. Just another day in Macho City for them. Don Haggerty began to cry. One more time, Reeves patiently. You came out of the Falcon. Then what? 2. In an interrogation room just down the hall, 2 dairy cops were speaking with Steve Dubé, 17, in the clerk of Probate's office upstairs. 2 more were questioning John Webben Cartu, 18, and in the chief police's office on the 5th floor. Chief Andrew Rackmarcher and Assistant District Associate Tom Burslin were questioning 15-year-old Chris Unwin, who wore faded jeans and grease Semerton t-shirt and blocky engineers. Boats was weeping Raid Marcher and Bo Tiller had taken him because they had quite actually assessed him as the weak link in the chain. Let's go through it again, Bo Tiller said in this office just as Jeffrey Reeves was saying the same thing 2 floors down. We didn't mean to kill him, Unwin blubbered. It was the hat. He couldn't believe he was still wearing the hat after what Webby said the first time. And I guess he wanted to scare him. For what he said, Chief Raid Macher interjected. Yes, to the John Garton on the afternoon of the 7th. Yes, to Webby. Unwin burst into fresh tears. But we tried to save him when we saw he was in trouble. At least, and Stevie Dubé did. He didn't mean to kill him. Come on, Chris. Don't shit us, Bo Tiller said. You threw the little queer into the canal. Yes, and then 3 of you came into the make a clean breast of things, Chief Raid Macher. And I appreciate that, don't we, Andy? You bet. It takes a man to own up and what he did, Chris. So don't fuck yourself up by lying now. You meant to throw him over the minute you saw him and his fag buddy coming out of the Falcon, didn't you? No! Chris Unwin protested vehemently. Bot Teller took a pack of Marlboros from this shirt pocket and stuck one in his mouth. He offered the pack to Unwin. Cigarette? Unwin took one, but Teller had to chase the tip with a marching order to give him a light because of the way Unwin's mouth was trembling. But when you saw he was wearing the hat, Raid Macher asked, Unwin dragged deep, lowered his head so that his greasy hair fell in his eyes, and jetted smoke from his nose, which was littered with black heads. Yeah, he said, almost too softly to be heard. Bautzeller leaned forward, brown eyes gleaming. His face was predatory, but his voice was gentle. What, Chris? I said yes. I guess so, to throw him in, but not to kill him. He looked up at them, face frantic and miserable, and still unable to comprehend the stupendous change which had taken place in his life since he left the house to take in the last night of Derry's Canal Days festival with two of his buddies at 7:30, the precious even. Not to kill him, he repeated, and that guy under the bridge. I still don't know who he was. What guy was that? Rockefeller asked, but without much interest. They had heard this part before as well, and neither of them believed it. Sooner or later, men accused of murder almost always drag out that mysterious other guy. Bautzeller even had a name for it. He called it the one-armed man syndrome, after that old TV series, The Frettermans. The guy in the clown suit, Chris Unwin said, and shivered the guy with the balloons. 3. The Canal Days Festival, which ran through July 15 to July 21st, had been a rousing success. Most Derry residents agreed a great thing for the city's moral images and pocketbook. The week-long festival was pledged to mark the century of the opening of the canal, which ran through the middle of downtown. It had been the canal which had fully opened Derry to the lumber trade in the years 1884 to 1910. It had been canal which had birthed Derry's boom years. The town was spruced up from the east to west and north to south. Portholes which some residents swore hadn't been patched for 10 years or more were neatly filled with hop top and rolled smooth. The town buildings were rubbed turpentines on the inside, repainted on the outside. The worst of the graffiti in Bessie, much of it coolly linical, anti-gay statements such as "kill all queens" and "AIDS from God, you hellbound homos," was sanded off the benches and wooden walls of the little covered walkway over the canal known as the Kissin Bridge. And Canal Days Museums was installed a free empty storefronts downtown and filled with exhibits by Michael Hanlon and local Little Brian. And amateur history, the town's oldest families loaned freely of their almost priceless treasures, and during the week of the festival, nearly 40,000 visitors paid a quarter each to look at Eden House menus from the 1890s, longer bits, axes and pieces from the 1880s, children toys from the 1920s, and over 2,000 sand photographs and 9 reels of movie films of life as it had been in Derry over the last 100 years. The museum was sponsored by the Derry Ladies Society, which varied some of Hanlon's proposed exhibits, such as the Nostra Street tramp chair from the 1930s, and photographs such as those of the Bradley gang after the Nostrand shootout. But all agree it was a great success, and no one really wanted to see those gory old things anyway. It was so much better to associate the positive and eliminate the negative, as the old song said. There was a huge stripped refreshment tent in Derry Park and band concerts that every night in Bazey Park. There was a carnival with rides by Smokey's Greater Shows and games run by local townfolk, and special tram cars circled the historic section of the town every hour on the hour and ended up at this grouty and animable money machine. It was here that Audrey Mellon won the hat which would get him killed, the paper top hat with a flower and a band which said, "I Heart Dairy." 4. "I'm tired," John Webben said. Like his two friends, he was dressed in unconscious imitation of Bruce Springsteen. Along, if asked, he would probably call Springsteen and whip or Fagin and would instead profess a mission for such bitchy heavy metal groups of Def Leppard, Twisted Sisters, or Judas Priest. The sleeves of his plain blue t-shirt was torn off, showing his heavily muscled arms. His thick brown hair fell over one eye. This touch was more John Carter Mellencamp than Springsteen. There were blue tattoos on his arm, arcane symbols which looked as if they had been drawn by a child. "I don't want to talk no more. Just tell us about Tuesday afternoon at the fair," Paul Hughes said. Hughes was tried and shocked and dismayed by this whole sordid business. He fought again and again that it was as if Derry Canal Days ended with one finale event, which everyone had somehow known about, but which no one had quite dared to put down on the daily program of events. If they had, it would make look like this. Saturday, 9 p.m., final band concert featuring the Derry High School Band and the Barber Shop Melon Man. 10 p.m., giant fireworks show. 10:35 p.m., ritual sacrifice of Audrey Mellon, official ends Canal Days. "Fuck the fair," Wembley replied. "Just what's said to Mellon and what he said to you." "Oh, Christ," Webby rolled his eyes. "Come on, Webby," Hodges' partner said. Webby Carter rolled his eyes and began again. 5. Carton saw the two of them, Mellon and Haggerty, mincing along with their arms about each other's waist and giggly like a couple of girls. At first, he actually thought they were a couple of girls. Then he recognized Mellon, who had been pointed out to him before. As he looked, he saw Mellon and turned to Haggerty, and they kissed briefly. "Oh, man, I'm gonna barf," Webby cried, disgusted. Chris Unwin and Steve Dubé were with him. When Webby pointed out Mellon, Steve Dubé said he thought the other fag was named Don, somebody, and that he'd pick up a kid from Derry, high hitchin', and then tried to put a few moves on him. Mellon Harrogant began to move toward the three boys again, walking away from the pitch till you win, and towards the Cardinals' exit. Webben Carton would later tell officers Hughes and Colno that his civic pride had been wounded by seeing a fucking faggot wearing a hat which said, "I Heart Dairy." It was a silly thing. That hat of paper association of a top hat with a great big flower sticking up from the top of and nodded about in every direction. The silliness of the hat apparently wounded Webby's civic pride even more, as Mellon and Haggerty passed each other with his arm linked about the other wrist. Webby Garton yelled out, "I ought to make you eat that hat, you fucking ass bandit!" Mellon turned toward Garton, fluttered his eye furiously, and said, "If you want something to eat, hun, I can find something much tastier than that hat." At this point, Webby Garton decided he was going to rearrange the faggot's face in the geography of Mellon's face. Mountains would rise in consonance would drift. Nobody suggested he suck the root. Nobody. He started toward Melon. Melon's friend Hagrid, alarmed at Tempest, to pull Melon away, but Melon stood his ground, smiling. Garton would later tell Officers Hughes and Canal that he was pretty sure Melon was high on something. So he was. Hagrid would agree when this idea was passed to him by Officer Garton and receives. He was high on 2 fried doughboys, smeared with honey on the carnival. On the whole day, he had been consciously unable to recognize the real menace which Webby Garton presented. But that was Audrey, Don said, using a tissue to wipe his eyes and smearing the smuggling eyeshadow he was wearing. He didn't have much in the way of protective coloration. He was one of those fools who think things really are going to turn out all right. He might have been badly hurt there and then if Garton hadn't felt something tap his elbow. It was a nightstick. He turned his head to see Officer Frank Machen, another member of Derry's finest. Never mind, little buddy, Machen told Garton. Mind your business and leave those little gay boyos alone. Have some fun. Did you hear what he called me? Garton asked hotly. He was now joined by Unwin and Dubé. The two of them, smelling trouble, tried to urge Garton on up the midway, but Garton trudged them away, would have turned on them with his fist if they had proceeded. His matronly had borne an insult which he felt must been averaged. Nobody suggested he suck the root. Nobody. I don't believe he called you anything, Macha replied, and you spoke to him first. I believe. Now move on, Sonny. I don't want to have to tell you again. He called me a cur. Are you worried you might be then? Machi asked, seeming to be honest, interested, and Garton flushed a deep, ugly red during his extension. Egerton was trying with increasing desperation to pull Audrey Mellon away from the scene. Now, at last, Mellon was going. Ta-ta, love, Audrey called cheekily over his shoulder. Shut up, candy-ass, Machen said. Get out of here. Garton made a lunge at Mellon, and Matchett grabbed him. I can run you in, my friend, Machi said, and the way you're acting, it might not be such a bad idea. Next time I see you, I'm gonna hurt you, Garton bellowed after departing pair and heads turned to stare at him. And if you are wearing that hat, I'm gonna kill you. This town don't need no faggots like you. Without turning, Mellon waggled the fingers of his hand. The nails were painted crease and put an extra little wiggle in his walk. Garton lunged again. One more word or one more move, and in you go, Marchand said mildly. Trust me, my boy, for I mean exactly what I say. Come on, Webby, Chris Unwin said uneasily. Mellow out. You like guys like that? Webby asked Matchy, ignoring Chris and Steve completely. Huh? About the bum puncher? I'm neutral, Manchin said. What I'm really in favor of his peace and quiet. And you are upsetting what I like pizza face. Now, do you want to go around with me or what? Come on, Webby, Steve Dobey said quietly. Let's go get some hot dogs. Webby went straightening his shirt with extraordinary moves and brushing the hair out of his eyes. Manchin, who also gave a statement on the morning following Audrey Mellon's death, said, The last thing I hear him say as him and his buddies walk off was, next time I see him, he's going to be in serious hurt. Please, hon. 6. Please, I've got to talk. My mother, Steve Dubé said for the third time. I've got to get her to mellow out, my stepfather, or there is going to be one hell of a punching match when I get home. In a little while, Officer Charles Averin told him. Both Averino and his partner, Barnum Morrison, knew that Steve Dubé would not be going home tonight, and maybe not for many nights to come. The boy did not seem to realize just how heavy this particular bust was, and Averio would not be surprised when he learned later on that Dubé had left school at age 16. At that time, he had still been in Water Street Junior High. His IQ was 68, according to the Welchlearn he had taken during one of his free trips through the 7th grade. Tell us, what happened when you saw Melanin coming out of the Falcon? Morrison invited. No, man, I better not. Well, why not? Averio asked. I already talked too much, maybe. You came in to talk, Averio said. Isn't that right? Well, yeah, but listen, Morrison said warmly, sitting down next to Dubé and shooting him a cigarette. You think me and Chick like her here like fags? I don't know. Do we look we like fags? No, but we're your friends, Steve-O, Morrison said solemnly. And believe me, you and Chris and Webby need all the friends you can get just about now. Because tomorrow, every bleeding heart in this town is going to be screaming for you guys' blood. Steve Dubé looked dimly alarmed. Averio, who could almost read this hair-bagged pussy little mind, suspected he was thinking about his stepfather again. And although Averio had no liking for Derry's small gay community, like every other cop on the force, he would enjoy seeing the Falcon shut up forever. He would enjoy seeing the Falcon shut up forever. He would have been delighted to drive Dubé home himself. He would in fact have been delighted to hold Dubé's arm while Dubé's stepfather beat the creep to oatmeal. Averio did not like gays, but this did not mean he believed they should be tortured and murdered. Melanin had been savaged when they brought him up from under the canal bridge. His eyes had been open, burgeoning with terror, and this guy here had absolutely no idea of what he had helped to do. He didn't mean to hurt him, Steve repeated. This was his fallback position when he became even slightly confused. That's why you want to get out front with us, Averio said, earless. Get the true facts of the matter out in front, and this maybe won't amount to it a piss hole in the snow. Isn't that right, Barney? As Rain Morrison agreed. One more time. What did you say, Averio Coke? Well, Steve said, and then slowly began to talk. 7. When the Falcon was opened in 1973, Elmer Curtin thought his client would consist mostly of bus riders. The terminal next door serviced 3 different lines: Trailways, Greyhound, and Aroostook Country. What he failed to realize was how many of the passengers who ride buses are women or families with small children in town. Many of the others kept their bottles and brown bags and never got off the bus at all. Those who did were usually soldiers or sailors who wanted no more than a quick beer or two. You shouldn't have very well go on a blender during a 10-minute rest stop. Curtin had begun to realize some of these home truths by 1977, but by then it was too late. He was up to his tits in bills, and there was no way that he could see out of the red link. The idea of burning the place down for the intrusions occurred to him, but unless he hired a professional to torch it, he supposed he would be caught and he had no idea where professionals agonists hung out. Anyway, he decided in February of that year that he would give it until July 4th. If things didn't look as if they were turning around by then, he would simply walk next door, get on the Hound, and see how things look down in Florida. But in the next 5 months, an amazing quiet short of processor came to the bar, which was painted black and gold inside and decorated with stuffed birds. Elmo's Curtin's brother had been an amateur taxidermist who suspiciously in birds, and Elmer had inherited the stuff when he died. Suddenly, instead of drawing 60 beers and pouring maybe 20 drinks at night, Elmer was drawing 80 beers and pouring 100 drinks, and 120 sometimes, 160. His climate was young, polite, almost exclusively male. Many of them dressed outrageously, but those were years when outrageous dress was still almost the norm, and Elmer Curtin did not realize that his partners were just about almost exclusively gay until 1981 or so. If Derry residents had heard him say this, they would have laughed and said that Elmer Curtin must think they had all been born yesterday, but his claim was perfectly true. Like the man with the cheating wife, he was practically the last to know, and by the time he didn't care. The bar was making money, and while there were 4 other bars in Derry which turned a profit, the Falcon was the only one where raptors and parters did not regularly demolish the whole place. There were no women to fight over, for one thing, and these men, fags or not, seemed to have learned a secret of getting along with each other which their heterosexual counterparts did not know. Once he became aware of the sexual preferences of his regulars, he seemed to hear luring stories about the Falcon. Everywhere these stories had been culturing for years, but until 81 Curtin simply hadn't heard them. The most innocently tellers of these tales he came to realize were men who wouldn't be dragged into the Falcon with a chainful for fear on all the muscles would go out of their wrist or something. Yet they seemed privy to all sorts of information. According to the stories, you could go in there any night and see men close dancing, rubbing their cocks together right out on the dance floor. Men French kissing at the bar, men getting blowjobs in the bathroom. There was suddenly a room out back where you went if you wanted to spend a little time on the Tower of Power. There was a big old fellow in the Nazi uniform back there who kept his arm greased most of the way to the shoulder and who would be happy to take care of you. In fact, none of these things were true. When folks would have first did come in from the bus station for a beer or a high ball, they sensed nothing out of the order in the Falcon at all. There were a lot of guys, sure, but that was no different than thousands of working men's bars all across the country. The climate in them was gay, but gay was not a synonym for stupid. If they wanted a little outrageousness, they went to Portland. If they wanted a lot of outrageousness, Ramon-style outrageousness, or Peck Bags, boy-style outrageousness, they went down to New York or Boston. Derry was small, Derry was provincial, and Derry's small gay community understood the shadow under which it excited quite well. Don Haggergan had been coming into the Falcon or 2 or 3 years on the night in March of 1984. When he first showed up with Audrey Mellon, before then, Haggergan had been the sort who plays the field. rarely showing up with the same escort half a dozen times. But by late April, it had become obviously even to Elmer Curtin, who cared very little about such thing, that Hagridon and Melanin had a steady thing going. Hagridon was a draftsman with an engineering firm in Bagot. Audrey Melanin was a freelance writer who published anywhere and everywhere. He could airline magazines, confession magazines, regalation magazines, Sunday supplements, sex letter magazines. He had been working on a novel, but maybe that wasn't serious. He had been working on it since his third year of college, and that had been 12 years ago. He had come to Derry to write a piece about the canal. He was on assignment from New England by Ways, a glossy bit monthly that was published in Connors. Audrey Melanin had taken the assignment because he could squeeze Byways for 3 weeks, worth an expensive money, including a nice room at the Derry townhouse, and gather all the material he needed for the piece of maybe 5 days. During the other 2 weeks, he could gather enough material for maybe for another reckonal pieces. But during that 3-week period, he met Don Haggerty, and instead of going back to Portland when his 3 weeks on the cuff were over, he found himself a small apartment on Coffinus Lane. He lived there for only 6 weeks. Then he moved in with Dog Haggerty. 8. That summer, Haggerty told Harold Garden and Jeff Revis was the happiest summer of his life. He should have been on the lookout. He said he should have known that God only puts a rug under guys like him in order to jerk it out from under their feet. The only shadow, he said, was Audrey's extravagantly Parisian reaction to Derry. He had a t-shirt which had Maine ain't bad, but Derry's great. He had a Derry Tigers high school jacket, and of course there was the hat. He claimed to find the atmosphere viral and creatively invigorated. Perhaps there was something to this. He had taken his language and novel out of the trunk. For the first time in nearly a year. Was he really working on it then? Gardiner asked Hagrid, not really caring, but what it to keep Hagrid primed. Yes, he was bursting pages. He said it might be a terrible novel, but it was no longer going to be a terrible unfinished novel. He proceeded to finish it by his birthday in October. Of course he didn't know what Derry was really like. He thought he did, but he hadn't been here long enough to get a whiff of the real Derry. I kept trying to tell but he wouldn't listen. And what's Derry really like? Don Revis asked. It's a lot like a dead strumpet with maggots squirming out of her coos, Don Haggerty said. The two cops stared in silent amazement. It's a bad place, Haggerty said. It's a sewer. You mean you two guys don't know that? You two guys have lived here all of your lives and you don't know that? Neither of them answered. After a little while, Hagrid went on. 9. Until Audrey Mellon entered his life, Don had been planning to leave Derry. He had been there for 3 years, mostly because he had agreed to a long-term lease on an apartment with the world's most fantastic revenue. But now the lease was almost up, and Don was glad. No more long commuting back and forth to Bangor. No more weird vibes in Derry. He once told Audrey, it always felt like 13 o'clock. Audrey might think Derry was a great place, but it scared Don. It was not just this town's tightly perfect attitude, an attitude as clearly expressed by the town's perchers as by the Griffith in Basie Park, but that was one thing he had been able to put his finger on. Audrey had laughed. Don, every town in America has a continent that hates the gay folks, he said. Don't tell me you don't know that. This is, after all, the era of Ronnie Moran and Phyllis Housefly. Come down to Basie Park with me, Don had replied after seeing that Audrey really meant what he was saying. And what he was really saying was that Derry was no worse than any other fair-sized town in the hinterlands. I want to show you something, my love. They drew to Basie Park. This had been in mid-June, about a month before Audrey's murder. Haggard told the cops. He took Audrey into the dark, virulent, unpleasant-smelling shadows of the Kissin Bridge. He pointed out of the graffiti. Audrey had to strike a match and hold it below the writing in order to read it. Show me your cockcore, or I will cut it off you. I know how people feel about the gays, Don said quietly. I got beaten up at a truck stop in Dayton when I was a teenager. Some fellows in Portland set my shoes on fire outside of the sandwich shop, while this fat-assed old cop sat inside his Curson and laughed. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen anything quite like this. Look around here. Check it out. Another match revealed. Stick nails in eyes of all faggots, for God. Whoever writes these little homelesses has got a case of the deep-down crisis. I'd feel better if I thought it was just one person, one isolated sickie, but Don swept his arm vigorously down the ledge of the Kissin Bridge. There's a lot of this stuff, and I just don't think one person did it all. That's why I want to leave Derry, Aid. Too many places and too many people seem to have the deep-down craziness. Well, wait until I finish my novel, okay? Please, October. I promise no later. The air's better here. He didn't know it was the water he was going to have to watch out for, Don Haggard said bitterly. 10. Tom Burley and Chief Ranmarcher leaned forward, neither of them speaking. Chris Unwin sat with his head down, talking monotonously to the floor. This was the part they wanted to hear. This was the part that was going to send at least two of these assholes to Thomaston. The fair wasn't no good, Unwin said. They was already taken down. All the bitches rides, you know, like the Devil Dish and the Parachute Drop. They already had a sign on the bumper cars that said closed. Wasn't nothing open but baby rides, so we went down by the game and Webby saw the pitch till you win and he paid 50 cents. And he seen that hat the Quor was wearing and he pitched at that. But he kept missing it. And every time he missed, he got more in a bad mood, you know. And Steve, he's the guy who usually goes around saying mellow out. Like mellow out this and mellow out that. And why don't you fucking mellow out, you know? Only he wasn't in a real pissed up mood because they took this pill, you know. I don't know why kind of pill. A red pill, maybe an even Legion, but he keeps after Webby until I thought Webby was gonna hit him. You know, he goes, you can't even win the Cure's hat. You must be really wasting it if you can't even win that Cure's hat. So finally, the lady gives I'm a prize, even though the ring wasn't over it, because I think she wanted to get rid of us. I don't, maybe she didn't, but I think she did. It was this noisemaker thing, you know. You blow it, and it puffs up, and unrolls and makes a noise like a fart. You know, I used to have one of those. I got it for Halloween or New Year's or some fucking holiday. I thought it was pretty good. Only I lost it, or maybe somebody hawked it out of my pocket in the fucking play yard at school. You know. So then the fair's closing, and we're walking out, and Steve's still on Webby about not being able to win the Cure's hat. You know, and Webby ain't saying much, and I know that's a bad sign, but I was pretty faced, you know, so I knew out to change the subject, only I couldn't think of no subject, you know, so when we get into the parking lot, Steve says, "Where you want to go?" "Home." And Webby goes, "Let's cruise by the Falcon first and see if that's Cure's around." Butler and Rackenheimer exchange a glance. Butler traced a single finger and tapped it against his cheek. Although the doofus in the engineer boots didn't know it, he was now talking about first-degree murder. So I goes, "No, I gotta get home," and Webby goes, "You scared to go by that crowbar?" And I go, "Fuck no." And Steve's still high or something. And he says, "Let's go. Grease some queerment. Let's go grease some queerment. Let's go grease." 11. The timing was just right enough so that things work out wrong for everyone. Audrey Mellon and Don Haggerty came out of the Falcon of 2 beers and walked up past the bus station and then linked hands. Neither of them thought about it. It was just something they did. It was 10:20. They reached the corner and turned left. The Kissing Bridge was almost half a mile upriver from here. They meant to cross Main Street Bridge, which was much less picturesque. The Castorpicus was summer low. No more than 4 feet of water sliding listlessly around the Compton pillars. When the duster drew a purse of them, Steve Dobe had spotted the 2 of them coming out of the Falcon, and Glennon pointed them out. They were on the edge of the span. "Cut in! Cut in!" Webb and Carter screamed. The 2 men had just passed under a streetlight, and he had spotted the fact that they were holding hands. This infuriated him, was not as much as the hat infuriated him. The big paper flower was nodding crazily this way and that. "Cut in, goddammit!" And Steve did. Chris Unwin would deny active perdition in what followed, but Don Haggerty told a different story. He said that Garton was out of the car almost before it stopped, and that the other 2 quickly followed. There was talk, not good talk. There was no attempt at viciously or false cornering on Audrey's part this night. He recognized that they were in a lot of trouble. "Give me that hat," Garton said. Give it to me." "Queer. If I do, will you leave us alone?" Audrey was wheezing with fright, almost crying, looking from Unwin to Dubé to Garreton with terrified eyes. "Just give it to me, the fucker!" Audrey handed over. Garton produced a switch knife from the left front pocket of his jeans and cut it into 2 pieces. He rubbed the pieces against the seat of his jeans. Then he dropped them to his feet and stomped them. Don Haggerty backed away a little while their attention was divided between Audrey and the hat. He was looking, he said, for a cop. "Now, will you let us all?" Audrey Mellon began, and that was when Garrett punched him in the face, driving him back against the waist-high parachute railing of the bridge. Audrey screamed, clapping his hands to his mouth. Blood poured through his fingers. "Aid! Aid!" Hadrian cried and ran forward again. Dubé tripped him. Garton booted him in the stomach, knocking him off the sidewalk and into the roadway. A car passed. Haggerty rose to his knees and screamed at it. "It didn't slow!" The driver, he told Gardner and Reeves. never even looked around. "Shut up, Quir," Dubé said, and kicked him in the side of the face. Hagrid fell on his side and in the gutter. Simonitius. A few moments later, he heard a voice, Chris Unwin's, telling him to get away before he got what his friend was getting. In his own statement, Unwin verified given this warning. Hagrid could hear Fundin, blows, and the sound of his lover screaming. Audrey sounded like a rabbit in a snare. He told the police. Hagrid crawled back toward the intersection and the bright lights of the bus station. And when he was distance away, he turned back to look. Audrey Mellon, who stood about 5'5" and might have weighed 135 pounds soaking wet, was being pushed from Garton to Dubé to Unwin in a kind of triple play. His body jittered and flopped like the body of a rag doll. They were punching him, pummeling him, ripping at his clothes. As he watched, he said, Garton punched Audrey in the crouch. Audrey's hair hung in his face, blood poured out of his mouth and soaked his shirt. Webby Garton wore 2 heavy rings of his right hand. One was a Derry High School ring. The other one he had made in shop class, an interwide, brass. DB stood out 3 inches from his ladder. The letters stood for the dead bugs and a metal band he personally admired. The rings had torn Audrey's upper lid, open in a shatter free of his upper teeth at the gum line. "Help!" Hagrid shrieked. "Help! Help! They're killing him! Help!" The buildings of Main Street loomed dark and secret. No one came to help, not even from the one white island of light which marked the bus station, and Hagrid did not see how that could be. There were people in there. He had been seen when he and Aid walked past. Would none of them come to help? None at all? "Help! Help! They're killing him! Help, please, for God's sake!" "Help!" And a very small voice whispered from Don Hagrid's left. And then there was a giggle. Bums rush. Garton was yelling now, yelling and laughing. All 3 of them. Hagrid told Garton and Reeves had been laughing while they beat up Adrian up. "Bums rush! Over the side! Bums rush! Bums rush! Bums rush!" Dubé chanted, laughing help. The small voice said again, and although the voice was grave, that little gig followed again. It was like the voice of a child who cannot help itself. Hagrid looked down and saw the clown, and it was at this point that Garton and Reeves began to discount everything that Hagrid said, because the rest was the raven of the lunatic. Later, however, Harold Gardiner found himself wondering when he found that the Unwin boy had also seen a clown, or said he had, he began to have second thoughts. His partner either never had them or would never admit to them. The clown, Hagrid said, looked like a cross between Ronald McDonald and that old TV clown Bozo, or so he thought at first. It was the wild tuft of orange hair that brought such competition to mind, but later conversation had caused him to think the clown really looked like Niter. The smile painted over the white pancake was red, not orange, and the eyes were a weird shiny silver contact lens, perhaps but a part of him brought through them, and continued to think that maybe that silver had been the real color of those. He wore a badgy suit with an orange pom-pom. Buttons on his hand were cartoon gloves. "If you need help, Don," the clown said, "help yourself to a balloon." And it offered the bunch of helped in one hand. "They float," the clown said. "Down here, we all float. Pretty soon, your friend will float too." 12. "This clown called you by name," Jess Reeves said in a total explanation voice. He looked over Hagrid and bent head at Harold Gardiner, and one eye drew down in a wink. "Yes," Hagrid said, not looking up. "I know how it sounds." 13. "So then you threw him over," Butler said. "Bums rush." Not me, Unwin said, looking up. He flicked the hair out of his eyes with one hand and started at them, urgently. When I saw they really meant to do it, I tried to pull Steve away because I knew the guy might get banged up. It was like 10 feet to the water. It was 20 free. One of Chief's raid matchers, Perleton men, had already measured. But it was like he was crazy. The two of them kept yelling, "Bums rush! Bums rush!" And they picked him up. Webby had him under the arms and Steve had him by the seat of the pants. And 14. When Hagrid saw what they were doing, he rushed back toward, then screaming, "No! No! No!" at the top of his voice. Chris Unwin pushed him backward, and Hagrid landed in a teeth-rattling heap on the sidewalk. "Do you want to go over too?" he whispered. "You run, baby!" They threw Audrey Mellon over the bridge and into the water. Then Hagrid heard the splash. "Let's get out of here," Steve Dubé said. He and Webby were backing toward the car. Chris Unwin went to the railing and looked over. He saw Hagrid first sliding and crawling his way down the weedy, trash, littering, and blanketment to the water. Then he saw the clown. The clown was dragging Audrey out of the far side with one arm. Its balloon were in its other hand. Audrey was dripping wet, choking, moaning. The clown twisted its head and grinned up at Chris. Chris said he saw its shining silver eyes and its barred teeth. Great big teeth. He said, like the lion in the circus, man. He said, I mean, they were that big. Then he said he saw the clown shove one of Audrey Mellon's arms back so it lay over his head. Then what Chris Bulliter said, he was bored with this part. Fairy tales had bored him since the age of 8 on. I don't know, Chris said. That was when Steve grabbed me and hauled me into the car. But I think it bit into his armpit. He looked up at them again, uncertain now. I think that's what it did. Bit into his armpit. Like it wanted to eat him. Man, like it wanted to eat his heart. 15. No, Hagrid said when he was presenting with Chris Unwin's story. In the form of questions, the clown did not drag Aid up on the far bank, at least not that he saw, and he would grant that he had been something less than a disrented officer. By that point, he had been out of his fucking mind. The clown, he said, was standing near the far bank, with Audrey's dripping body clutched in its arms. Aid's right arm was stuck stiffly out behind the clown's head, and the clown's face was indeed Aid's right armpit. But it was not bitten. It was smiling. Hagrid could see it looking out from the beach. Aid's arm and smiling. The clown's arms tightened, and Hagrid heard Rip's splinter. Float with us, Don, the clown said out of its grinning red mouth, and then pointed with one of its white gloved hands under the bridge. Balloons floated against the underside of the bridge. Not a dozen, or a dozens, but thousands, red and balloon and green and yellow, and printed on the side of each was I Heart Dairy. 16. Well now, that surely does sound like a lot of balloons, Revis said, and tripped Harold Gardner another wink. I know how it sounds, Hagrid retreated, in the same dreary voice. You saw those balloons, Gardner said. Don Hagrid slowly held his hands up in front of his face. I saw them as clearly as I could see my own fingers at this moment. Thousands of them. You couldn't even see the underside of the bridge. There were too many of them. They were rippling a little and sort of bouncing up and down. There was a sound, a funny low sequeling noise that was their sides rubbing together and strings There was a forest of white strings hanging down. They looked like a white soup brushing through those strings. Aid was making awful choking sounds. I started after him, and the clown looked back. I saw its eyes, and all at once I understand who it was. Who was it, Don? Harold Gardner asked softly. It was Derry, Don Hagrid said. It was this town. And what did you do then? It was Revis. I ran, you dumb shit, Hagrid said and burst into tears. 17. Harold Gardner kept his peace until November 13, the day before John Carter and Stephen Dubé were to go on trial in Derry District Court for the murder of Audrey Mellon. Then he went to see Tom Bollinger. He wanted to talk to about the clown. Bollinger didn't. But when he saw Gardner might do something stupid without a little guidance, he did. There was no clown, Harold. The only clowns out that night were those 3 kids. You know that as well as I do. We have 2 witnesses. Oh, that's crap. Unwin decided to bring on the one-armed man, as in, he didn't kill the poor little faggot. It was the one-armed man as soon as he understood. He'd really gotten his buns into some hot water this time. Hagrigan was harshly. He stood by and watched those kids murder his best friend. It wouldn't have surprised me if he'd seen flying saucers. But Boteler knew better. Gardner could see it in his eyes, and the assistants, D.A.'s ducking and dodging, irritating him. Come on, he said. We're talking about independent witness here. Don't bullshit me. Oh, you want to talk bullshit? Are you telling me you believe there was a vampire clown under the Main Street Bridge? Because that's my idea of bullshit? No, not exactly, or that Hagrid saw a billion balloons under there, each imprinted with actually the same thing as what was written on his lover's hat, because that is also my idea of bullshit? No, but then why are you bothering with this? Stop cross-examining me, Gardner roared. They both described the same, and neither knew what the other one was saying. Bonthaler had been sitting at his desk, playing with a pencil. Now he put the pencil down, got up, and walked over to Harold Gardner. Bonthaler was 5 inches shorter, but Gardner retreated a step before the man's anger. Do you want us to lose his case, Harold? No, of course not. Do you want those runners' swords to walk free? No! Okay, good. We both agree on the basics. I'll tell you exactly what I think. Yes, there was probably a man under the bridge that night. Maybe he was even wearing a clown suit, although I've dealt with enough witnesses to guess maybe it was just a stubum, a transcendence wearing a bunch of cast-off clothes. And I think he was probably down there scrounging for drop change or road meat, half a burger someone chucked over the side, or maybe the crumbs from the bottom of a Frito bag. Their eyes did the rest, Harold. Now, is that possible? I don't know, Harold said. He wanted to be convinced, but given the exactly tally of the 2 descriptions. No, he didn't think it was possible. There's the bottom line. I don't care if it was Kingo the clown or a guy in an Uncle Sam suit on Sillets or Hubbard the happy homo. If we introduce this fellow into the case, their lawyer is going to be on it before you can say Jack Robinson. He's going to say those 2 little innocent lambs out there with their flesh, haircuts, and new suits didn't do anything but toss that gay fellow Mellon over the side of the bridge for a joke. He'll point out that Mellon was still alive after he took the fall. They have Hagrid's testimony as well as Unwin's for that. his clients didn't commit murder. Oh no! It was a psycho in a clown suit. If we introduce this, that's going to happen, and you know it. Unwin's going to tell that story anyhow. But Hagrid isn't, Bot Teller said, because he understands without Hagrid, who's going to believe Unwin? Well, there's us, Harold Gardner said with a bitterness that surprised even himself. But I guess we're not telling. Oh, give me a break, Bon Teller roared, throwing up his hands. They've killed him. They didn't just throw him over the side. Garton had a switchblade. Melon was stabbed 7 times, including once in the left lung and twice in the testicles. The wounds matched the blade. 4 of his ribs were broken. Dubé did that? Bear hugging him. He was bitten. All right. There were bites on his arm, his left cheek, his neck. I think that was Unwin and Garton, although we're only got one clear match, and that one's probably not clear enough to stand up in court. And so, all right, there was a big chunk of meat gone from his right armpit. So what? One of them really liked to bite, probably even got himself a pretty good bone on while he was doing it. I'm betting Garton Aldo will never prove it. And Melon's earlobe was gone. Bollinger stopped, glaring at Harold. If we let in this clown, the story will never bring it home to them. Do you want that? No, I told you the guy was a fruit. He wasn't hurt, Bollinger said. So, hee-ho, the Dario, along comes these 3 push holes in their engineer boots, and they steal his life. I'm going to put them in the slam, my friend, and if I hear they've got their puckery little assholes cored down at the Thomasons, I'm going to send them cards saying, I hope whoever did it had AIDS. Very furry, Gardner, though, and the gun combination will also look very good on your record when you run for the top spot in 2 years. But he left without saying more because he also wanted to see them put away. 18. John Weber Garton was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years. In Thomason State Prison, Stephen Bissoff Dubé was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in Swampscott State Prison. Christopher Philip Unwin was tried separately as a juvenile and convicted of a second-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 6 months at the South Windham Boys Training Facility, sentence suspended. At the time of this written, all their sentences are under appeal. Garton and Dubé may be seen on any given day, girl watching or playing penny pitch in Bassey Dart Park, not far from where Melon's tore body was found floating against one of the pillars of the main street. Don Hagrid and Chris Unwin have left town. At the major trial, that of Garton and Dubé, no one mentioned the clown.